At exactly 9:48 p.m., the rolling garage barrier lowered. It marked the final, ordinary second. Just the simple shutting of an entryway, a solitary lamp clicking to black within a residence nestled up in the Catalina foothills out in Tucson, Arizona, a peaceful suburban block, crisp desert breeze, plus an 84-year-old lady indoors by herself preparing for sleep. Not a single person living on that block possessed a clue that trouble was brewing. Not one neighbor phoned the cops. Not a soul tapped on her entryway. The entire subdivision remained dead silent, that specific type of absolute quiet a late January evening embraces once the daylight vanishes past the Santa Catalina peaks. Yet a dark plot was currently unfolding, a scheme that was carefully calculated, a presence that was currently keeping a very close eye on the place. Before diving deeper into this mystery, we must understand exactly who Nancy Guthrie was prior to the evening of January 31st, 2026. She was exactly 84 years of age. She called Tucson her home for more than 50 years. You see, she brought up 3 kids out in that dusty metropolis Savannah, Annie and Cameron. She was employed over at the University of Arizona for almost 20 years. Furthermore, she attended religious services regularly. Each and every Sunday without exception, she logged into an online congregation meeting alongside a dear pal. Her mind remained incredibly quick. She maintained her total autonomy. She resided completely by herself inside that Catalina Foothills property, the identical residence where the garage shut at precisely 9:48 p.m. during that fateful Saturday evening. However, she suffered from restricted movement capabilities. She required everyday prescriptions that she simply could not survive missing. Her cardiovascular health was extremely delicate. Her oldest girl, Savannah, ended up stating these exact details on television later on, keeping an unwavering tone, while her gaze revealed all the hidden pain she held back. Let that sink in for a second. An 84-year-old grandmother completely isolated indoors, relying heavily on prescription drugs, while out there hidden by the dusty darkness. An unknown figure possessed all those intimate details. Plus, this stalker completed thorough background work. This perpetrator remained incredibly observant for quite some time. So, let us rewind back to exactly how Nancy arrived at her residence on that specific evening. Things kicked off similarly to how countless weekend nights begin for households all around the United States. Right around 5:32 p.m. on January 31st, 2026, Nancy caught a rideshare over to her daughter Annie's place, as she resides quite close alongside her spouse, Tomaso. The group shared a meal. They hung out for the entire evening. Just a standard household gathering out in Tucson. Cozy, relaxed, and thoroughly mundane. The specific type of gathering you would never expect to serve as a final farewell. Much later into the evening, her relatives transported Nancy back to her own place. Their vehicle rolled right up into the well-known driveway belonging to her Catalina Foothills residence. The automated bay door raised up. Nancy stepped indoors. The heavy barrier lowered back down completely. 9:48 p.m. The relative steering the vehicle waited out front, ensuring she entered securely. After that, he steered his car down the road. This proved to be the absolute final occasion any member of Nancy Guthrie's relatives witnessed her enjoying a regular, tranquille existence. Not a single person realized it at the time. Nobody possessed a single cause to worry. The entire night turned out wonderful. The property appeared perfectly secure. Every single detail seemed entirely normal and undisturbed. However, this exact point is where the sequence of events turns into a puzzle that detectives are currently unable to completely unravel. At an unknown point past midnight during the very early morning of February 1st, 2026, a disguised figure showed up right outside Nancy Guthrie's main entryway. Her security camera recorded this suspect, facing downward, making an intentional effort to dodge the optical sensor. Next, this intruder executed a highly strategic move. He stretched his arm toward a container garden by the porch, tore off a leafy branch, and utilized that leaf to block the lens. He avoided breaking it, refused to tear it off the brickwork. He merely obscured it with incredible caution and precision, which led retired federal behavioral profilers analyzing the tape to point out a huge red flag regarding this precise maneuver. Blocking a lens instead of shattering it implies that this culprit preferred to prevent Nancy from noticing a disguised person through her interior monitor and consequently deciding against unlocking the deadbolt. He required her to stay completely oblivious. He desperately wanted that threshold to be unlocked. He obviously planned this out way ahead of time, right down to this exact minor step. This definitely is not the pattern of a random criminal who simply wandered onto this property by mere chance. This clearly represents a stalker who kept a close watch, a person who meticulously analyzed the real estate, memorized the porch layout, and comprehended precisely how her security system functioned. Right before 1:50 a.m., Nancy's porch surveillance deactivated entirely. Roughly 20 minutes following that, a totally different exterior lens caught some motion around the yard. Following that, at around 2:28 a.m., a chilling event occurred that completely stunned law enforcement. Nancy Guthrie's personal heart-tracking tech disconnected for good. This sudden dropout stands as perhaps the absolute most crucial technical clue found throughout this whole investigation. This fact provides authorities with a rock-solid piece of evidence regarding the exact time frame they must zero in on. Detectives suspect that Nancy was taken from her residence forcefully at some point, bridging the gap between her porch surveillance shutting down right prior to 1:50 a.m. and the exact second her vital tracking wearable dropped its connection at 2:28 a.m. That leaves approximately 40 minutes of sheer blackness in a sleepy desert subdivision where not a single person caught a sound or spotted a thing. If you guys haven't joined the Case Files Collective family yet, go ahead and smash that subscribe button immediately. Our channel dives deep into currently unfolding mysteries while providing the meticulous scientific analysis these tragedies warrant. All of our content relies strictly on double-checked truths, locked-in chronologies, and actual physical proof. This mystery remains completely unsolved. Breaking news is on the horizon. Trust me, you absolutely want to stick around for our upcoming discoveries. While you're scrolling down below, leave a quick comment for the algorithm. What part of the globe are you tuning in from today? This specific disappearance has captured the spotlight all across America and internationally. Let the community know your location. The following sunrise, being Sunday, February 1st, 2026. Nancy's best pal held out hope for her to log into their regular Sunday morning internet worship gathering. Nancy failed to show up. Her pal tried calling, but the phone just rang. Eventually, she contacted Annie and the extended relatives. Right around midday, relatives showed up at Nancy's place. Deputies from the Puma County Sheriff's Department pulled up shortly after. The scene quickly made it clear that they weren't dealing with a routine welfare check or a basic misunderstanding. Forensic technicians discovered biological material matching Nancy Guthrie right near the entrance of her house. The woman had vanished. This kicked off an inquiry that would soon become a massive, nationally followed mystery regarding her whereabouts. Federal agents stepped in, bringing a massive wave of Joint Task Force manpower straight into the Catalina foothills area. Over the next couple of days, more than 400 detectives started chasing down every possible clue. While the hotline blew up with calls, detectives were actively gathering and analyzing security video from nearby houses and street cameras. Detectives chased down even the flimsiest of rumors. Yet right out of the gate, police made a subtle move that completely altered the trajectory of the hunt. Authorities seized a navy blue Honda CR-V, which happened to be the exact ride that dropped Nancy off the final evening she was spotted breathing. The second that SUV rolled into the evidence bay, bringing along its upholstery, cargo area, interior grips, carpets, and all the invisible debris it had gathered, things escalated. The guy behind the wheel instantly transformed into the central topic of conversation across the whole inquiry. However, the discoveries federal agents made inside that interior, along with the implications for the mystery, deserve a completely separate discussion. You see, when crime scene techs dismantle an automobile down to the bare metal, they aren't merely searching for obvious clues left behind. Their primary goal is spotting the exact things a perpetrator attempted to scrub away. Placed under specialized laboratory lighting, those two scenarios reveal wildly contrasting stories. All criminal inquiries feature a turning point where attention moves away from the initial location and hones in on a mobile, traveling piece of the puzzle. For Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, this crucial shift happened during the initial 48 hours centering entirely on an automobile as police acted fast. Shortly after Nancy vanished, deputies from the Pima County Sheriff's Department hauled a blue Honda CR-V straight out of Annie Guthrie's driveway. That was the identical transport Tomaso Chioni drove to drop Nancy off on the evening of January 31st. It was the exact automobile that parked at that Catalina Foothills property at 9:48 at night, paused until the garage shut, and vanished into the dark desert. The SUV officially became a crime scene. Authorities seized it with rapid precision, because evidence recovery units never drag their feet in situations of this magnitude. With each ticking minute, crucial fragments deteriorate, stray threads blow away, and cellular matter naturally begins to decompose. Should that ride hold any secrets about Nancy Guthrie's fate? Detectives had to extract those details immediately. They certainly wasted no time. Come February 4th, 2026. Reporter Ashley Banfield dropped a massive bombshell during her audio show that shocked everyone. She referenced a supposedly esteemed police insider who possessed first-hand details about the ongoing manhunt. This contact allegedly named Tomaso Chioni as the leading person of interest, though she clarified these were just speculative thoughts rather than hard facts. The public backlash was immediate and severe. Across the country, folks started linking Tomaso Chioni's identity to criminality. Even though zero arrests, verified clues, or formal police declarations backed up the rumor, Sheriff Chris Nanos tackled the gossip head-on, blasting the broadcast as completely irresponsible while verifying that nobody had been officially accused. He aggressively rejected the idea that any relative was under a microscope, explaining that grabbing the SUV was just a totally normal part of the process. It was a basic, by-the-book move that detectives always execute whenever an automobile ties into the final timeline of someone who vanished. However, normal procedural steps can appear incredibly suspicious to the general public. Consider the perspective of regular folks tuning in back then. The cops snatched up a vehicle and kept it locked away without dropping a single hint as to why. A media personality used an insider to label the driver as the main target, while the sheriff denied it without actually exonerating a single soul. Meanwhile, Nancy Guthrie remained entirely unaccounted for. If you pause and imagine being in their shoes, where does your brain naturally jump to? Since the court of public opinion never sits around waiting for lab tests, the rumor mill operates as quickly as breaking news alerts. During the first week of February 2026, that rapid-fire gossip severely damaged Tomaso Chioni's reputation for everyone to see. Things changed on February 16th. Sheriff Nanos issued a formal press release that left absolutely zero room for misinterpretation. Every single one of Nancy Guthrie's close relatives, along with their partners, were officially cleared of any wrongdoing. He didn't beat around the bush. The man laid it out perfectly straight, following up with a definitive remark that instantly shut down weeks of wild theories. He noted the relatives were incredibly helpful and polite, stating that implying otherwise wasn't just inaccurate, but genuinely malicious. That declaration was supposed to kill any chatter surrounding her loved ones, and on paper, it succeeded. Yet, by March 11th, 2026, the ride hadn't been returned. The Navy Honda CR-V was still sitting locked up in the police lot. Journalist Dave Mack verified that the automobile was sitting inside an auto repair garage, strictly monitored by Pima County deputies. According to Mack, the SUV was literally getting rebuilt bolt by bolt and door by door, following a relentlessly thorough lab inspection. Those specific words paint a very clear picture. A simple police search means you get your ride back in one piece. But if it heads to a body shop to be rebuilt, they absolutely gutted it. They took out every single detachable part, inspecting, testing, and logging each one. Chairs were unbolted, carpets rolled up, inner plastics dismantled, and the cargo area stripped bare. Specialists then shined specialized ultraviolet beams into every hidden crevice and tight space, hunting for microscopic residues. Pulling apart a vehicle like that demands massive amounts of time and money, something detectives wouldn't authorize unless they had a solid motive. Relatives have already been ruled out as suspects, yet the SUV remains in police custody. Caught right in the middle of those two details is a massive mystery the authorities haven't addressed yet. What exactly turned up during that intense teardown? The answer might be surprisingly mundane. Detectives regularly keep hold of cars well past clearing the owners, often just to hunt for hidden GPS bugs, clues of a break-in, or proof that someone else drove it around secretly. Yet, it certainly means something. As the crime scene techs kept tearing the SUV apart, detectives were busy chasing down another crucial lead that could blow the whole mystery wide open. This clue didn't originate from the automobile at all. Instead, it was discovered out in the dirt, stemming entirely from a discarded hand covering. It was dropped by a suspect who was smart enough to block a security lens, yet sloppy enough to leave physical proof at the scene. Whenever cops impound a ride for evidence, the public usually imagines detectives just popping the doors, peeking under the cushions, and aiming a flashlight into the dark spots. That isn't reality. That definitely doesn't happen in high-level government probes, and certainly not for crimes of this magnitude. The real-life procedure is painstaking, incredibly tedious, and way more exacting than the dramatized sweeps they show on crime dramas. Grasping exactly how that teardown works is crucial if you want to figure out why this specific blue Honda CR-V turned into the centerpiece of the hunt for Nancy Guthrie. Everything kicks off with aggressive record-keeping. Without even laying a finger on the car, technicians snap pictures of the entire exterior and interior, noting exactly how the driver's chair is angled and where the rear-view mirrors are pointed. They capture the random junk sitting in the console, that crinkled piece of paper on the dash, and the coat tossed in the rear. Absolutely nothing is moved before being logged perfectly in its original state. That's because location tells a story in crime scene analysis, meaning an object's placement is often just as crucial as the item itself. Once that's done, the heavy lifting starts. Techs bust out specialized illumination tools, super bright lasers dialed to exact frequencies, which instantly expose hidden bodily fluids and compounds you could never spot with standard bulbs. Organic residues entirely hidden from normal sight will literally glow in the dark when hit with the proper beam spectrum. One tiny thread shed from a shirt and mashed into the upholstery will light up like a neon sign under those rays. Just a speck of dirt dragged inside on a sneaker tread will suddenly become glaringly obvious on a seemingly clean carpet. We aren't talking about movie magic here. This is exactly how the Federal Bureau of Investigation handles their daily evidence processing. The strategy pays off beautifully since automobiles are basically giant rolling vacuums for microscopic clues. Just consider the way a vehicle naturally hoards physical traces over time. Whenever someone drops into the driver's chair, they shed a massive amount of dead tissue. Opening or slamming a door guarantees that sweat and oils will swap back and forth from the person's palm straight onto the plastic trim. Tossing anything into the cargo hold instantly sheds tiny threads, dust, and invisible debris carried over from its previous location. A worn jacket will drop cotton strands. A backpack drops residual grime collected from the ground before getting tossed inside the vehicle. Mud from a unique spot out in the woods gets stuck in boot grooves and rubs off onto the rubber matting. You can't see any of this with the naked eye, yet it will easily last for months if left undisturbed. Automobiles basically function as airtight vaults. The second those windows roll up, whatever evidence fell inside is totally shielded from outside weather. Gusts of air won't blow it around, and storms can't scrub it clean. The debris just camps out in the stitching, the carpet loops, and the dark crevices, biding its time. This exact reason explains why the federal tech units and evidence crews threw so much manpower at that Honda CR-V. They weren't just hunting for glaringly obvious clues like a murder weapon. Instead, the goal was to uncover whatever microscopic secrets the interior had silently sucked up and stored away, without the driver ever noticing. Tackling a mystery of this scale requires following a rigid playbook. Techs use specialized sticky tapes across the upholstery to peel away barely visible threads. Industrial-grade vacuums packed with high-tech screens are dragged across the carpets, sucking up microscopic debris you could never spot on your own. Investigators take cotton swabs to the interior latches, the wheel, the shifter, and literally any other spot a driver might graze to hunt for DNA profiles. They peel out the carpet in the back, pop open the wheel well hidden underneath, and scour the whole cavity for clues. The plastic moldings running down the doors and trunk area are entirely popped off so detectives can look for items deliberately stuffed into the wall cavities or debris that simply shook its way behind the trim over time. That detail perfectly aligns with what reporter Dave Mack uncovered. The automobile wasn't just fingerprinted and handed over. It was being literally rebuilt from scratch inside an auto garage. The term rebuilt speaks volumes, proving the authorities ripped that ride apart until they hit the bare metal chassis. You don't do that for a basic traffic stop check. That is a total ground-up teardown for a major crime scene. Let's break down exactly what the task force was trying to discover or definitively eliminate. Their main priority was figuring out geography. Cars act like giant lint rollers for their surroundings, constantly picking up dirt profiles, flower spores, and tiny rock fragments from the pavement. Since nature creates totally unique signatures for different areas, dirt experts and bioanalysts can often match those tiny specks directly to an exact geographical spot. Should that crossover have visited a spot linked to the woman vanishing, tiny traces of that specific landscape might still be trapped deep inside the rubber mats or stitched right into the cargo upholstery. The next big mystery centered on bodily fluids. Did detectives find any of Nancy Guthrie's physical evidence lingering inside that cabin that couldn't be explained away by a basic 10-minute commute from work? Like finding a stray hair or some dead skin on the car door, basically? Any clue proving someone lingered there instead of just dropping it off and running. Then came the third, equally crucial, puzzle proving the exact opposite. Was it possible for detectives to confidently say the car was completely clean of anything suspicious? Crossing a suspect off the list isn't a setback, it's a massive step forward. Each hypothesis that crumbles under the microscope just shrinks the pool of possibilities. It helps shift manpower to where it's actually needed, steering the whole search closer to the facts instead of chasing ghosts. The authorities are keeping a tight lid on what those lab reports actually revealed. Yet the hunt for answers definitely didn't hit the brakes. If anything, things sped up. Right while the crime scene technicians were tearing through that SUV, an entirely different batch of clues was already being processed at a facility out of state. This batch wasn't about the ride at all. It was entirely focused on that disguised person hovering on Nancy Guthrie's porch. And those specific clues were on the verge of sparking the biggest scientific breakthrough this whole case had seen. Yet, it was also the most aggravating. Out of every single inch the technicians swabbed inside that crossover, one specific spot got the absolute most scrutiny. It wasn't because it was the easiest spot to check, but rather because, time and time again, the back cargo area is a total gold mine for clues. When detectives look at a car, the trunk holds a very unique scientific value. It's that one spot we completely ignore as we go about our day, quietly gathering all sorts of debris on its own. Anything you throw back there, whether it's your groceries, gym gear, or a heavy jacket chucked in on a freezing evening, leaves a hidden trail. We're talking loose threads, dirt tracked in from other places, and tiny specks smashed right into the carpet by the sheer heaviness of whatever was sitting on it. You wouldn't catch any of it with the naked eye, but a proper lab setup can pull every last bit of it out. Detectives tackle the cargo space with the exact same slow, careful precision they use on the cabin, only they dial their focus up to 11. Before a single thing is moved, they snap pictures of every square inch from a bunch of different perspectives. The exact spot where every item is sitting gets mapped out precisely as they discovered it. They hit the carpet with special UV lights before peeling it back, and the actual bagging of evidence doesn't kick off until all that paperwork is totally finished. Specialized sticky tape is rolled over the floorboards to grab onto those impossibly tiny threads. They gently pull up the interior carpeting to see what might have slipped down into that gap between the cloth and the metal framing. Since dust and dirt can easily hide there untouched for weeks on end, the hidden wheel well gets popped open and handled completely on its own. While the plastic walls are checked to see if anything drifted into the cracks, each piece of dust is packed up, tagged, and shipped to the technicians with a rock-solid paper trail tracking exactly who handled it. The logic behind why law enforcement goes to such extreme lengths on the rear cargo space is pretty simple. Stuff doesn't have to sit somewhere forever just to leave a mark. Even a quick touch does the trick. Toss a duffel back there for 10 minutes, and it's going to shed pieces of whatever fabric it's built from. Smashing a shirt into the carpet for just a tiny bit of time is guaranteed to drop practically invisible strings behind. Anytime you move something from one spot to another, it drags microscopic hitchhikers along with it from where it started. Dirt makeups, bits of leaves, or random manufacturing chemicals can actually be mapped back to a very specific spot by the experts. In this particular case, this was an incredibly massive deal. That's because the cops weren't just wondering if a shady item had been tossed in the back. Their focus was way more dialed in than that. Did any item, no matter how briefly, end up back there during that vital time frame between 9:48 p.m. on January 31st and the early morning of February 1st? And if it did, what clues did it drop? Reporter Brian Anton, who was covering the story locally in Tucson, shared what his insiders were saying regarding how hard the authorities tore that car apart. He actually brought up the Brian Kohberger situation as a solid comparison, explaining that big crime lab units will literally rip a vehicle down to the studs, taking out the chairs, pulling the steering wheel off, ripping away the plastic walls. They aren't just looking to grab clues. They're looking for absolute certainty, a guarantee that every single inch got checked and absolutely zero details slipped through the cracks. From the looks of it, that's exactly what went down with this specific ride. The crossover that eventually ended up at a shop to get put back together didn't just get a quick dusting. It had been entirely dismantled by the lab guys. And based on all the signs, the cargo area got the exact same hardcore teardown as the rest of the vehicle. Hey, what's the clock say in your neck of the woods right now? Let us know down in the comments section. We love seeing where you all are tuning in from while we dig into this mystery. Now, here's the detail that the official documents haven't totally cleared up for us yet. Right now, the exact details pulled from the cargo sweep are still being kept under lock and key by the Pima County cops and the feds. Here is what we know for sure. The relatives were officially ruled out as suspects on February 16th, even after they were given a clean bill of health. The authorities kept that crossover locked up in the evidence lot for several more weeks. Every time journalists pushed the sheriff's office on when the vehicle would be released, they got the exact same answer. It's currently in the queue to be handed back, though no specific timeline has been finalized. Let that timeline sink in for a second. The family gets officially cleared on February 16th. Yet, by March 11th, they still don't have their vehicle. That's a 23-day gap between law enforcement explicitly ruling the family out and that automobile remaining in police custody. Detectives aren't exactly known for sharing their reasoning when they keep a ride longer than expected. There are completely standard, administrative explanations for this that don't imply anyone is under suspicion, like double-checking to ensure nobody else tampered with the vehicle behind the owner's back. They might be sweeping it for GPS trackers to see if someone was keeping tabs on the automobile leading up to the evening of January 31st. Or they could be making absolutely certain that nothing inside pertains to the perpetrator's whereabouts or the wider scope of the case. Independent of the relatives, every single one of those scenarios is entirely plausible. These theories perfectly align with the relatives staying entirely off the suspect list, though whatever secrets are locked inside that trunk haven't been shared with the press. Whatever evidence it yielded to the crime lab, whether that was stray threads, microscopic debris, bodily fluids, or absolutely nothing at all, it all factors into a case that is very much alive, pushing forward, and leading up to a major break. While that storage compartment was parked in an evidence facility awaiting comprehensive analysis, detectives had actually pivoted their attention toward a completely different discovery, not hidden in an automobile, but sitting out in the dusty landscape 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's residence. It was a tiny item, but initially, it seemed like the massive turning point authorities were praying for, just 2 miles down the road from the Guthrie property, right alongside a street in the Catalina foothills. Law enforcement stumbled upon a single glove. At first glance, nobody knew if it actually held any significance. During the initial phases of the search, civilian helpers and police squads were scouring every single highway, culvert, and patch of wilderness circling the subdivision. Roughly 16 of these hand coverings were ultimately scooped up from different spots near the house, though federal agents eventually determined the vast majority were just dropped by folks helping with the grid searches. However, there was one glaring exception. This specific piece looked exactly like the one sported by the disguised intruder caught on Nancy's front porch cam in the pre-dawn hours of February 1st. So they rushed it off to an independent testing facility in Florida. The lab technicians handled the item meticulously, pulling a genetic signature from it specifically, an unidentified man's sequence before feeding it into CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, which is arguably the strongest suspect matching database the country has to offer. It's a massive federal registry boasting almost 27 million genetic markers, with upward of 19 million of those belonging to convicted felons from all over the nation. Since launching back in the 1990s, this network has helped crack upwards of 750,000 cases. Whenever a fresh sample gets uploaded to CODIS and triggers a match, investigators can put a name to a face in less than 24 hours. Yet, on February 17, 2026, Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos faced the press and shared the exact news his team had been dreading. They got absolutely nothing. The genetic material pulled from that discarded fabric failed to generate even one ping in the entire CODIS network. There wasn't a single correlation to any documented criminal in the federal registry. It didn't line up with the biological evidence collected from inside Nancy Guthrie's house, nor did it point to anybody close to her relatives. The genetic fingerprint was completely valid and testable. It just pointed to a mystery man. And since it drew a blank in America's biggest forensic database, that specific failure actually gave authorities a massive clue. It meant the person sweating into that fabric had probably never been handcuffed for a serious crime anywhere in the nation. They had 0 major convictions on their sheet and 0 genetic records on file with the feds. Detectives couldn't just punch a name into a computer and pull up a rap sheet for this guy. As far as the justice system was concerned, this person was a complete ghost up to this point. Though Sheriff Nanos refused to let the public view this as a brick wall, he chose his words very carefully during the briefing, pointing out that this particular piece of evidence was located a full 2 miles from the scene. Police were also holding on to similar items scooped up 5 miles out, even 10 miles out. And triaging evidence is absolutely critical in a manhunt this massive. So, while that hand covering was certainly an interesting clue, it actually wasn't the most crucial biological trace they had. The real story was unfolding straight out of Nancy's living room, especially after the updates on February 13th. That was the day the Pima County Sheriff's Office officially announced they had swabbed genetic markers indoors that didn't belong to the homeowner, nor did they belong to anyone who had a valid reason to be walking through those doors. That huge revelation completely moved the spotlight off the mystery item by the highway and pointed it squarely at the inside of the Guthrie house. After all, a random clothing scrap sitting 2 miles out forces detectives to make a lot of educated guesses to link it back to the killer. Genetic traces found right at the crime scene leave no room for doubt, though this is precisely where the forensics team hit a massive scientific roadblock. Insiders tied to the probe informed CBS News that the swabs taken from the living space resulted in what lab experts call a low-level profile. It wasn't completely missing or entirely worthless, but it was either too broken down or just too microscopic to easily pull a clear, solid match. One contact put it bluntly, they simply didn't have a large enough sample to make a definitive identification right out of the gate. Another police insider pointed out that while these tiny traces can be boosted using cutting-edge lab tech, going through that amplification process is a total waiting game, dragging on for weeks or even months at a time. Officials from the Pima County Sheriff's Office verified that their partnered testing facility down in Florida was still working hard to process the biological evidence, and they haven't figured out just yet if they can pull a full, usable genetic blueprint from it. This exact hurdle is why law enforcement turns to cutting-edge investigative family tree tracking. This is the exact same method authorities used to finally unmask the Golden State Killer following over 40 years of dead ends. It's also the identical technology investigators relied on to put together the puzzle against Brian Kohberger following the tragic killings of 4 undergrads at the University of Idaho. This approach is a whole different ballgame compared to CODIS. Rather than running a genetic swab against a registry of convicted criminals, this kind of genealogical sleuthing runs the data through open-source family history websites. Detectives aren't actually hunting for a direct hit on the perpetrator. They're searching for distant cousins with matching biological markers, giving experts the puzzle pieces needed to construct a lineage map straight back to the killer. C.C. Moore. the head of genealogical research at Parabon Nanolabs and a pioneer in this scientific arena, didn't mince words when she spoke publicly about the Guthrie investigation. She stated unequivocally that she fully believes this advanced tracing technique will ultimately put a name to the person who left those biological traces behind. In her view, it was only a waiting game. However, the clock is ticking in this active hunt, with a level of urgency you simply don't feel once a mystery is wrapped up. That's mostly due to the fact that America's top 3 heritage tracking networks, Ancestry, 23, and Me, alongside MyHeritage, contain a combined total of more than 50 million user submissions. And every single one of them has blocked police access unless a judge signs off on a warrant. Right now, detectives are limited to searching the much smaller, consent-based registries that max out at under 2 million total users. The perpetrator could easily be hiding inside those massive corporate vaults. Tracking him down is entirely possible, but authorities are currently locked out of those bigger networks. Because of this, the genetic material that holds the key to discovering who kidnapped Nancy Guthrie is currently stuck in a Florida testing facility, getting scrutinized trait by trait, even as detectives simultaneously chase down every other possible clue. Interestingly enough, one major break didn't originate from a lab. It arrived via postal delivery, exactly 2 miles down the street from the Guthrie residence. Authorities stumbled upon a lone glove. It was just resting on the shoulder of the road, completely unassuming and incredibly simple to overlook. However, the second the crime scene tech spotted the item, it instantly transformed into arguably the most crucial piece of tangible evidence they had gathered so far. The reason being, this specific handwear looked identical to the one sported by the disguised figure caught on Nancy's front porch. Security footage the evening she vanished, it had the exact same brand style, an identical shade, and matching proportions. Detectives bagged it up right away, secured the evidence, and shipped it off to that independent Florida testing site to hunt for genetic material. The whole nation held its breath for the outcome. Then, on February 17th, 2026, Sheriff Chris Nanos shared the findings with the press. The biological trace pulled from that fabric failed to trigger a single hit within CODIS. That system is the Federal Bureau of Investigation's centralized genetic registry, a massive federal catalog holding the biological blueprints of over 26 million individuals, mostly folks who have been found guilty of offenses or booked for serious felony violations. They got absolutely zero pings, no fragmentary overlaps, and not even a distant family tie to anybody currently logged in that massive network. That dead end actually handed the detectives a massive, highly specific clue. The person who ditched that piece of clothing by the Guthrie property had almost certainly avoided any major criminal arrests across the entire country. They weren't dealing with an established crook whose rap sheet was already on the police radar. The perpetrator was a flying completely under the radar of the established federal tracking architecture. This was an individual who, prior to the evening of February 1st, 2026, hadn't dropped a single biological breadcrumb into the government's files. Pause for a second and let the reality of that sink in. Authorities are hunting a suspect who possesses the skill to orchestrate and pull off a highly sophisticated, premeditated strike on an 84-year-old lady inside a secure, private community. Yet this mastermind has absolutely no traceable criminal history. Finding that specific mix of traits is incredibly rare. It screams intense preparation. It also makes you wonder exactly who this phantom is, and where they picked up the tactical know-how and brainpower to pull off what the video evidence captured. After all, the security recording remains arguably the most insightful clue investigators have in this entire mystery. Back on February 10th, 2026, the head of the FBI, Kash Patel, opted to share those front porch camera snapshots and recording frames with the general public. Those visuals revealed a guy standing roughly 5'9" to 5'10" in height, sporting a medium frame, with a black mustache peeking out from underneath his face covering. He had on a dark-colored rucksack, which experts eventually pinpointed as a 25-liter Ozark Trail hiking bag, the exact type you can grab off the shelf at Walmart for less than $30. The man looked like he was packing a gun tucked into a makeshift rig right on his chest. Yet his actual physical actions around the surveillance device are what really fascinated the behavioral analysts. The guy wasn't in a hurry at all. He refrained from shattering the glass or violently tearing the tech off the brickwork. Instead, he casually extended his arm toward a decorative planter sitting right by the front door, gently grabbing a leaf to blind the sensor at a totally sluggish pace. It was incredibly methodical, displaying the exact body language of a criminal who has mentally rehearsed the whole routine and understands precisely how many seconds he can burn. Ex-FBI profiler Johnny Grusing provided an expert breakdown of the suspect's mindset, completely changing the way both cops and ordinary citizens viewed that particular maneuver. Obscuring the lens instead of outright breaking it, Grusing pointed out, was almost certainly a calculated choice driven by a highly specific motive. If Nancy had glanced at her security tablet and spotted a disguised stranger glaring at the porch, she would have kept that deadbolt locked tight. However, a blocked view resulting in a pitch-black screen leaves things wide open to interpretation. It might just be a glitch in the app, or maybe a branch scraping the casing in the wind. It absolutely doesn't scream intruder alert the same way a balaclava does. The intruder knew exactly how human psychology works. He blocked the feed to heavily increase the odds that the homeowner would come check the porch, keeping her completely in the dark about the trap waiting on the other side. You don't just come up with that kind of sinister forethought on the fly. That takes severe practice and rigorous strategizing. Furthermore, Sheriff Chris Nanos went on the record to state that this specific residence was absolutely singled out on purpose. This wasn't just a crime of opportunity in some average subdivision. This wasn't a random house. The perpetrator deliberately picked out this location and did their homework. That disturbing fact leads authorities right back to the central mystery that has haunted this entire investigation since day one. Exactly how did the suspect pinpoint Nancy Guthrie's residence, figure out her daily routine, and map out the exact grounds of her estate? Detectives have pinpointed web queries made shortly prior to Nancy vanishing as a likely starting point. Authorities verified that an unknown party looked up Nancy Guthrie's property records online, alongside digging into Savannah Guthrie's net worth, a highly specific clue directly tying into the extortion attempt that surfaced later. Based on those electronic footprints, detectives know beyond a shadow of a doubt that this was a premeditated strike. The attacker put in the legwork. An individual sat behind a computer, located an 84-year-old lady's residence, connected the dots to her famous child, checked her income, and started running the numbers. At this point, a massive curveball completely rerouted the forensic evidence strategy. After the recovered handware failed to produce a hit in the database, detectives quickly switched gears to utilize a much more sophisticated and intricate method: investigative genetic genealogy. They turned to the exact same groundbreaking science that finally brought the Golden State Killer to justice, following years of dead ends. It is the very tool responsible for breathing new life into scores of unsolved mysteries nationwide. Leading industry expert C.C. Moore, who heads up the genetic genealogy division at Parabon Nanolabs, went on the record expressing absolute certainty that this scientific route would unmask their suspect. She put it plainly, calling it simply a waiting game. However, an unforeseen twist derailed everything concerning the piece of clothing that had everyone so hopeful. That specific item shipped off to Florida, the one yielding such a pristine genetic sequence, the breakthrough the whole nation was on the edge of its seat waiting for. It actually just belonged to a food service employee working at a shop directly opposite the discovery site. They had zero ties to the crime and were quickly cleared as a person of interest. It was merely a bizarre stroke of bad luck regarding location and scheduling. The actual perpetrator's clothing item remained missing, proving that the holy grail of genetic clues was never sitting in the dirt 2 miles away from Nancy's property after all. The real evidence was waiting right indoors the entire time, right as crime scene technicians were busy combing through the property and the abandoned car. Detectives were blindsided by an entirely new angle in the Nancy Guthrie mystery. The kidnapping officially evolved into an extortion plot. On Monday, February 2nd, 2026, barely 24 hours after the abduction, demands for cash started rolling in. These messages weren't sent to the police department or even the relatives. The kidnapper bypassed them completely and contacted the press. TMZ got their hands on a copy. Meanwhile, a pair of regional Tucson broadcast networks were sent similar drafts The letters requested $6 million in Bitcoin, demanding a transfer to an exact crypto account. The ticking clock was slated to run out at 5 o'clock in the evening on February 9th. Whoever penned the threat swore they would drop Nancy back off in Tucson no later than 12 hours after the funds cleared. Intelligence experts immediately flagged a huge clue regarding who received these letters. Picking out specific Tucson broadcast networks means the sender actually understood the local media landscape and knew exactly who held influence. Having that kind of insider grasp on regional news outlets led authorities to firmly believe the author was heavily acquainted with the city of Tucson. According to TMZ, insider police contacts revealed their primary hypothesis centered around the extortionist actually residing in or around Tucson. They suspected a neighborhood resident or somebody incredibly familiar with the terrain, ruling out a random out-of-towner pulling strings from afar. Furthermore, the letters were packed with highly sensitive facts that had deliberately been kept out of the press, including extremely precise logistical layouts of the victim's estate, intimate knowledge regarding a tampered security light in the rear garden, and pinpoint coordinates from Nancy's Apple Watch clues that absolutely required first-hand involvement. That undeniable accuracy elevated these letters way beyond the typical prankster garbage that inevitably floods into famous kidnapping investigations. The sender wasn't taking shots in the dark. They held the real facts. Savannah Guthrie made her official public plea on February 5th, releasing a recorded broadcast with her brother and sister. She delivered a heartfelt message straight to the individuals holding their mom captive, keeping her tone incredibly steady and resolved. She confirmed they were willing to hand over the cash. She begged for evidence that her mother was alive and asked for a secure channel to negotiate. She announced, "We are holding on to hope that our mother is still alive." Unfortunately, the February 9th cutoff came and went. The captors never reached back out. No money traded hands. And nobody confirmed she was breathing. However, the crypto account referenced in the letter suddenly flagged some digital movement. TMZ stated that cyber units tracked transactions hitting that ledger, though the police kept the exact dollar figures and the source strictly under wraps. Ultimately, whether those funds actually tied back to the legitimate kidnapping plot was left entirely up in the air. Suddenly, on February 4th, a full 5 days before the crypto payment was even due, the entire case was rocked by a bizarre twist that sparked massive outrage and absolute chaos for the police. An individual out of Hawthorne, California, going by the name Derek Kala, fired off 2 texts to Annie Guthrie and Tomaso Chioni. He tried hiding behind a burner digit generated through an online service built specifically to mask caller identities. His communication was incredibly short and aggressive. "Did you secure the Bitcoin? We are sitting here waiting for the transfer to clear?" Exactly 3 minutes after shooting off those texts, he dialed up one of their relatives for a brief 9-second conversation. Federal agents managed to crack his digital disguise in a matter of hours. In a spectacular blunder, the guy literally registered the burner application using his actual name for the email account, while his internet service provider routed right back to his front door in California. Once federal agents pressed him on it, Kella confessed to firing off those texts. He confessed to detectives that he was tracking the ongoing story on the news and dug up the relatives' personal numbers through an online background check database. According to him, he only sent those messages out just to find out if the family might actually reply. 42-year-old Kella, who previously worked for Los Angeles County, got handcuffed and hit with federal charges for sending interstate extortion threats and utilizing electronic communications to intimidate and torment another individual. His initial court hearing took place out in California on February 6th, after which a judge let him out on heavily restricted bond terms, which required wearing an ankle monitor and completely staying away from anyone tied to this investigation, whether victims or bystanders. From an evidence standpoint, here is the crucial takeaway from this whole circus. Federal authorities made it crystal clear. This guy had absolutely zero ties to the authentic extortion letters. He was just a fraud who spotted a grieving family's vulnerability and decided to exploit their absolute worst nightmare. Taking him into custody, even though it felt like a win for the justice system, absolutely failed to push the investigation closer to finding Nancy or the actual kidnapper. However, the authentic extortion letters introduced a whole new level of complication to the case that detectives are currently still trying to untangle. since if those specific messages were drafted by the individual behind Nancy's abduction, they uncover a massive clue regarding what drove this offense. This absolutely was not a crime of opportunity. Money drove the entire plot. The perpetrator chose this specific victim largely due to her daughter's identity and income, fully convinced they could leverage that relationship into a $6 million crypto payday. That paints a distinct picture. While it remains a partial sketch, it definitely points detectives toward a specific type of suspect. They are hunting an individual driven by greed who intimately knew the area, grasped enough of Nancy's routine to strategize around it, directed letters to the correct news outlets, and leveraged non-public facts to prove they meant business. Plus, it is somebody who went to all that meticulous trouble without ever seeing a single dime payout. By the way, how are the skies looking in your neck of the woods today? Let me know down in the comments section as we dive right back into the timeline. Since the subsequent phase of this inquiry is precisely when the physical evidence starts getting increasingly clearer and infinitely more confusing all at once. The extortion letters, the fake suspect, the ticking clock that expired without a sound. All these elements are piled onto a genetic testing process that reached a dead end, a car inspection that remains unfinished, and a person of interest whose image was broadcast on national television while their identity stayed a total mystery. This bizarre mix of investigative progress and glaring blind spots is precisely where things have stood for more than 40 days. And sadly, that is exactly where we are still stuck today. Fast forward to February 16th, 2026. A full 16 days since Nancy Guthrie vanished into thin air. Sheriff Chris Nanos put out a highly blunt, crystal clear press release that absolutely sounded like a guy who was completely fed up with the rampant internet rumors. He publicly announced that the entire Guthrie household, meaning every single sibling and their partners, had been officially ruled out as persons of interest. The list was not just trimmed down or focused on a tighter group. They were totally exonerated. Every last relative. He backed that up with an absolutely definitive remark, stressing that the relatives had been incredibly helpful and polite, and emphasizing that they were the ones actually suffering here, implying anything different, he pointed out, was not just factually incorrect, but downright malicious. Then he threw in a comment that showed just how intense the backstage tension had gotten, literally pleading with journalists to respect their field and cover the tragedy with actual empathy and integrity. An active sheriff, knee-deep in a national inquiry featuring more than 400 agents, multiple forensics teams running simultaneous genetic tests, and extortion threats actively being scrutinized, actually had to pause everything just to beg the public for a little common courtesy. That really highlights just how wildly out of control the gossip had spiraled. Nanos went on to break down the actual detective work in incredibly simple language. The relatives were not just questioned and sent home. Authorities had actually seized their cell phones and laptops for digital extraction. Crime scene techs tore through their houses looking for clues, while their cars were towed away for thorough inspections, and the family happily agreed to every single request without putting up a fight. He made sure to emphasize that point. 100% compliant. In any normal situation, an announcement like that should have permanently shut down any internet chatter regarding the family's potential guilt. However, the vehicle was still locked up in an impound lot. That lone detail completely dominated discussions among reporters, detectives, and online sleuths for weeks following the formal exoneration. The relatives are declared innocent, yet their ride is still missing. Both facts were undeniably true at the same time, and the disconnect between them screamed for a logical answer that the police were not offering up to the press. By the time March 11th, 2026 rolled around, a solid 23 days after the official exoneration, the local authorities still held on to that blue Honda CR-V, except it was not sitting in an evidence bay, but rather at a garage getting rebuilt from the ground up. True crime journalist Dave Mack verified this exact piece of information during a March 10th episode of his podcast, pointing out that cops still retain total control of the SUV, meaning the Guthries did not have it back, and it was actively being pieced back together by a mechanic after an incredibly intense physical teardown. Whenever reporters pushed local law enforcement on a timeline for giving it back, the answers were always identical and intentionally non-committal. Authorities merely stated they were working on handing the SUV over to the family, but refused to provide any solid timeline on when that handoff would actually occur. Using the phrase currently underway doesn't point to a closed case. Instead, it clearly shows that investigators are still piecing things together. Brian Anton, an investigative journalist, went straight to the source and repeatedly contacted the local sheriff's department, hoping to get some straight answers. Every single time he asked, they gave him the exact same response. Officials stated they were working on giving the vehicle back. However, Anton pointed out to his audience that holding on to the ride for this long seemed incredibly unusual, especially since relatives had already been cleared of suspicion. To put things in perspective, he brought up the Brian Koberger investigation as a prime example, pointing out how detectives in that situation tore an automobile apart completely, taking out the steering wheel and seats just to wrap up their forensic work. That kind of deep dive isn't something you wrap up over a weekend. It only ends once the lab techs send back their final reports. Take a moment to think about the public remarks made by Jennifer Coffindaffer, who used to work as a special agent for the FBI. Normally, police hand a ride back to the person who owns it the second they finish combing through it for clues. If detectives rule out both the automobile and the people tied to it, getting the keys back is pretty much a breeze. However, Coffindaffer pointed out that dragging the timeline out this much really only leaves room for a couple of likely scenarios. The first option is that forensics hasn't finished analyzing the car yet, and those findings still have to be matched up against the rest of the clues they've gathered so far. The second option is that detectives discovered something inside the cabin that needs more explaining before they can completely move on from that angle. Neither scenario points to the relatives doing anything wrong. The head of the department emphasized this point, explaining that while the relatives remain cleared, the automobile itself is still playing an active role in the search for answers. Then there is another subtle piece of information that adds a whole new layer to the mystery. Detectives didn't just tow away the Honda CR-V. They also thoroughly searched a second ride, pulling NY's private Subaru out of her garage the very same afternoon they showed up at the house. The media hasn't really talked much about that second ride. Yet the fact that authorities searched it proves they weren't zeroing in on one particular suspect when checking out the cars. Instead, they cast a wide net, inspecting any automobile tied to NY's final confirmed locations and her personal space. A chopper flew close to the ground using special equipment meant to pick up faint electronic pulses from NY's heart monitor. But the crew didn't find anything concrete. Federal authorities spent the days right after she vanished hitting up dozens of firearms dealers all around the Tucson region. Investigators also reached out to various Walmart stores across the area, asking about a face covering and an Ozark trail bag caught on the front porch video. Since both products looked exactly like the kind of gear you typically or only buy at that retail chain, detectives were literally leaving no stone unturned. Even though authorities looked into several leads, everyone kept focusing on the automobile since it was the final spot Nancy Guthrie was seen right before her garage shut at 9:48 at night. Whether it drove off with microscopic clues, nothing at all, or materials still sitting in a lab right now, that ride definitely holds secrets we haven't heard yet. 41 days after the search began, Sheriff Chris Nanos gave an interview to NBC News and dropped a bombshell that brought the whole country's speculation to a grinding halt. He stated that they think they understand the suspect's reasoning and suspect it was a focused hit, though they aren't 100% certain just yet. Take a second to really digest that. We are talking about the head detective running one of the highest profile manhunts in the entire country right now. This is a guy managing more than 400 detectives, overseeing crime labs in several different states, and sifting through 40,000 separate leads. That exact official went on television to announce he probably figured out the motive, yet refused to share the details because he wasn't completely ready to lock in that theory. Saying that out loud accomplishes a couple of things at once. First off, it shows that authorities are actually getting somewhere with their hunt. On top of that, it proves that the biggest mysteries surrounding the whole situation haven't been solved yet. Phil Ramos, a former murder investigator who spent 30 years working for the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, didn't hold back when addressing those comments. He pointed out that figuring out the reason behind a crime is always crucial, but it only really matters if you can tie it to how the person pulled it off and the chance they had to do it. Having a theory for the crime without knowing exactly who did it or how they pulled it off just gives you a path to walk down, rather than the final answer. It helps detectives figure out who had a grudge, but it doesn't reveal the actual trigger man. That's exactly why. 41 days deep, the investigation feels stuck between two different realities. The main idea floating around is that a skilled outsider, armed with tech savvy and neighborhood familiarity, pulled off a calculated job strictly for cash. Honestly, all the tangible clues they've gathered so far heavily back up this exact theory. For instance, the suspect carefully hid the front porch camera behind some leaves instead of just breaking the lens. Then you have the duffel bag, the makeshift gun strap, and the fact that someone Googled NY's home location alongside Savannah Guthrie's paycheck details before making a move. Don't forget the extortion letters mailed to specific Tucson news channels, which contained secret details about the property that hadn't even been released to the press. Every single piece of this puzzle suggests a highly calculated hit, organized by someone whose meticulous prep work absolutely proves this wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment mistake. Tracy Walder, who previously served in both the CIA and the FBI, pushed this breakdown even further while speaking to the media. She firmly rejected the idea of a simple break-in that just happened to go terribly wrong. According to her, thieves don't kidnap people during a home invasion because dragging a hostage along just wastes time and makes the whole job way too dangerous. Instead, Walder argued that the video clips and physical clues point straight to an attacker fueled by a deep fixation on Savannah Guthrie, or someone holding a massive personal grudge against her. Going after a defenseless elderly woman living by herself matches that exact pattern, especially since anyone could easily look up where she lived on the internet. On March 12th, the sheriff made a public statement confirming that detectives are currently exploring whether the suspect utilized a signal blocker or intentionally knocked out the power on the evening the victim vanished. He noted that there is a specific sequence of events showing exactly when various devices lost connection. Authorities are actively trying to figure out if this outage was done on purpose and if it ties directly into the perpetrator's premeditated plans. Law enforcement found evidence of tampering at a neighborhood electrical box down the street from the residence, though the sheriff pointed out they haven't officially connected it to the crime yet, even if they haven't completely dismissed the idea either. This specific clue brings a whole new level of complexity to the timeline detectives are piecing together. If the network outage was actually an intentional act, and an intruder purposely blocked or severed the connection to the entire block prior to making a move on the house, it suggests a much higher degree of technological planning than what the initial security video implied. At the same time, we need to look at the other major avenue this ongoing case is pursuing. Forensic experts at the lab are currently analyzing and isolating the blended biological evidence that crime scene technicians gathered from the victim's property. Running the incomplete genetic sequence through the National Criminal Registry hasn't yielded any hits up to this point. Specialists have started tracing the family tree using advanced genetic techniques. C.C. Moore and the researchers over at Parabon Nanolabs firmly believe this method will ultimately identify the perpetrator, though getting results takes time we don't currently have. Plus, right now, federal agents are calling the extracted genetic material incomplete, meaning it doesn't have enough markers to trigger a national database hit or support a complete family tree trace on its own. What is your take on the situation? Let us know your thoughts down below. Option 1 points to a random stranger driven by money and a dark fixation, pulling this off solo or with very little help. Option 2 suggests a much more elaborate plot, where the culprit had intimate details about the victim's everyday routine and health struggles, knowing things that a simple public record search could never reveal. Weigh in with your opinion. Either way, both of these scenarios have one major thing in common. The individual who took the victim from her house during the early hours of February 1st, 2026, planned everything meticulously. They had the location memorized. They mapped out exactly where the security devices were placed. They understood the front porch setup so perfectly that they used a potted fern right there on the stoop to block the view. They somehow figured out that an 84-year-old lady struggling to get around and dealing with a weak heart was going to be completely by herself inside that residence past 9:48 at night. The lead official released a statement to the community recently, clearly highlighting just how wide open this investigation continues to be. He urged residents not to let their guard down or assume they are protected simply because this tragedy targeted one specific household, reminding everyone to stay vigilant. When the head detective cautions the community about a potential repeat offense, that doesn't sound like a mystery that's about to be solved. That sounds like a manhunt that is very much active and constantly shifting. We are all desperately hoping for that single breakthrough that continues to elude us as of March 14th, 2026. It has been 42 days since anyone laid eyes on the victim. Earlier today, the sheriff went on national television for a live broadcast on the Today Show. Millions tuned in alongside the victim's relatives to hear the head detective leading one of the largest modern manhunts in the country share an update that offered some hope but left plenty of things unanswered. He promised the public they were making headway and pushing the case forward. Even though they still haven't located the missing woman, nobody is currently in custody. Furthermore, the mysterious figure broadcasted across every major network for 6 weeks straight is still walking free. Let's break down exactly what we know about each part of this massive search today. First off, the compact SUV that has played such a massive role in this story is finally back with the relatives. Law enforcement officially gave the blue vehicle back to her loved ones earlier today. Wrapping up a massive and incredibly thorough forensic sweep of the interior, handing the keys over doesn't imply that the scientific value of the vehicle is completely exhausted. It simply shows that the crime scene techs are confident they gathered all the necessary physical evidence from the cabin. Any clues pulled from the seats, whether that's loose threads, microscopic debris, dirt from outside, or absolutely nothing at all, are currently sitting in a case file getting cross-referenced with the rest of the puzzle pieces. The SUV gave up its secrets. Exactly what those secrets are is something only the lab technicians and lead detectives currently know. Analyzing the genetic material is easily the trickiest and most vital part of the ongoing probe, and the sheriff verified recently that the blended physical evidence lifted off surfaces inside the victim's house could actually belong to multiple individuals, and professionals point out that pulling a clear, distinct genetic marker out of a combined trace is incredibly difficult for modern science to achieve. Technicians are still grinding away at that right now. As mentioned earlier, the incomplete sequence hasn't triggered a national hit, so teams are moving forward with building out a family tree. This kind of deep dive requires many months instead of just a few weeks, yet it has famously cracked cold cases that sat dormant for years, meaning detectives are banking heavily on it. A mysterious car caught on a smart doorbell roughly 2.5 miles away from the crime scene, around 2:36 in the morning on February 1st. Right around the time her heart monitor disconnected, is still a total mystery. Authorities publicly stated they know about the footage and are trying hard to track down the driver, sifting through it along with hundreds of thousands of other clips taken around the neighborhood that same evening. Officials have officially paused the search operations involving the specialized scent hounds. The sheriff made it clear that the canine units remain on standby should they be required down the road. Yet, their on-the-ground use is currently on hold, a strategic pivot, hinting that detectives are stepping away from sweeping physical manhunts and zeroing in on piecing together the facts they already have. Lawyer Peter Christensen hit the nail on the head during his interview with Newsweek, pointing out that authorities have transitioned away from community appeals and are now strictly focused on processing hard data. Authorities are slowly closing in, though the trap hasn't snapped shut just yet. Toward the end of February, the United Cajun Navy handed the sheriff a comprehensive 41-page proposal for getting involved. Their pitch included bringing in specialized tracking hounds and high-tech aerial drones to scour the unforgiving landscape of the Catalina foothills. Up to this point, the sheriff hasn't given them the green light. Worried that outside help might interfere with the ongoing criminal probe, this choice has sparked backlash from several policing experts, who firmly believe that turning down extra manpower in such a brutal environment makes absolutely no sense. The Guthrie family is still offering a massive $1 million bounty for any solid tips that lead directly to Nancy's safe return. You can still reach out to the Federal Bureau of Investigation by dialing 1-800-CALL-FBI. Alternatively, the Pima County Sheriff's Tip Desk can be reached at 520-35149. Law enforcement has fielded more than 40,000 leads, and they are meticulously running down every single one. Meanwhile, Savannah Guthrie took a leave of absence from her morning broadcast duties the moment her mom vanished. She did make a short appearance back on set a few days ago. Though she wasn't there to host, she just wanted to see her work family, express her gratitude, and lean on that support system to keep herself grounded as the search presses forward. Taking to social media, she wrote that her family is incredibly touched by the outpouring of support and positive thoughts coming from their local Tucson neighbors, as well as from folks nationwide. She begged the public to keep holding out hope and praying right alongside them, ending with a simple plea to bring her mother back. That short phrase captures the entire heart of this tragedy. Bring her home. It has been 41 days. We have a single disguised perpetrator completely missing from national crime records. A solitary car has been completely torn apart for clues and given back to the family, and technicians are still painstakingly trying to piece together a fragmented genetic sample. A lone extortion demand expired without a single word from the kidnappers. A grief-stricken household continues to gather outside their Tucson residence, placing bouquets at a massive memorial that the entire community has been contributing to since late winter. And at the center of it all is an 84-year-old grandmother who grabbed a meal with her loved ones on January 31st, pulled into her driveway in a blue Honda CR-V, and vanished without a trace after her garage shut at 9:48 that night. The trail hasn't frozen over, nor has the momentum stopped. We are simply in the grueling, tedious stage of a massive national manhunt where the easy clues have dried up, leaving the heavy lifting to the crime lab experts. It's a lot less flashy behind the scenes, and the news coverage inevitably starts to fade. However, this meticulous groundwork is exactly what secures a rock-solid conviction down the line. If you have even the slightest clue regarding Nancy Guthrie's whereabouts, dial the Bureau immediately. Contact local law enforcement right now. Also, for those of you who have stuck with this deep dive since part 1, we truly appreciate your support. Make sure to smash that subscribe icon, drop your thoughts below, and forward this breakdown to anyone who hasn't heard Nancy's story yet. Getting the word out is crucial, as putting more eyes on the situation makes it nearly impossible for the perpetrator to remain in the shadows. Nancy Guthrie needs to be found and brought back to her family. The fight for justice is far from finished.